It also hates you by extension since you are so precious to me. She took a slight pause. However, it also has developed an obsession with you. Due to the nature of Haunter's prison, only an extremely strong energy source can break it free. You have such an energy, and that is why Haunter wants you so badly, to free itself. In fact, if the old human Fuji wouldn't have intervened and bought me the time I needed to force some of my power through you, Haunter could very well be free right now. Ash's eyes widened. So that power I remember feeling, it was you after all. Arceus nodded to his exclamation. Yes, young one, it was my power you were channeling to subdue Haunter so yourself and Fuji could escape. I know you felt as though you were in great danger, but I was watching over you the entire time, ready to intervene and help you should the need call for it. When you channeled my power just before you lost consciousness, that was I interfering to assure nothing happened to you. Ash smiled softly at her. Thank you, Arceus, I should have had no question it was you that saved me. The mighty Pokémon looked down at him with an equal softness in her own eyes. You have no need to thank me for saving your life, my chosen. Without you this world would lose the potential for a very bright future. The boy continued to smile at her warmly before a curious expression yet again came over his face. Arceus, who was the man that sealed away Haunter, and also, could you tell me exactly what happened to Pokémon Tower before Haunter came along? What was this great catastrophe that everyone keeps saying was so horrible? Arceus lowered her face down to his level again before answering him. The answer to both of those questions are not for me to answer, young one. Seeing Ash about to say something, she cut him off. Fear not, Ash, the explanation you seek to these questions will be answered as soon as you wake from the sleep you are in. I guarantee you they will, she said reassuringly. Ash reluctantly nodded his head and decided to let the subject go before looking down at the ground again as a shadowed look passed over his features. He remained totally silent for a few minutes and Arceus grew concerned. What troubles you so, young one? The boy remained silent for several moments before he finally spoke in a low but clear voice. Arceus, is there any help, any hope for Haunter? He looked up at her with pleading eyes. Isn't there anything that can be done to help it? No one, person or Pokémon, should have to live their entire life so alone and full of pain. I know it's done terrible things, but there has to be good inside of Haunter. His eyes appeared questioning then. Right, Haunter can be saved, can't it? Arceus looked down at the boy who was looking up at her with so much hope and sadness in his eyes, and her heart broke for him. She knew how pure his heart was and how much he truly loved Pokémon, always hating to see any of them suffer. She let her own sadness show in her voice as she replied, Oh my dear little one. You don't know how many times over the years I have thought the exact same thing about that poor soul. I hate when any of my children becomes so lost in their own misery as Haunter has, and even though I would like to say there is help for it, I honestly have no idea if it is possible. Haunter has been so lost in anger and hatred for so many years that its true self has been buried underneath layer upon layer of pain and denial. Ash's eyes burned bright with determination and fire as he said loudly, Then I will take that pain away from Haunter and help it to see that there is more to life than anger and hatred. No. Arceus's voice boomed just as loudly, making Ash nearly fall down. Her voice calmed a little then before she spoke, Ash, I know exactly what you are thinking and I am telling you no. Ash yelled back defiantly, You have no idea what I was thinking. Arceus looked down at him knowingly. Oh, don't I? You were thinking of going back to the chamber where Haunter is held under Pokémon Tower and risking your life in order to find some way to help it. Am I correct now? The boy went silent and Arceus knew she had hit the nail on the head. She sighed yet again and spoke more softly, Young one, I know your heart is pure and that you just want to help, but you need to understand that Haunter is dangerous. Extremely dangerous. It has killed and taken the souls of more people than you can possibly imagine. It would do the exact same thing to you after it used your energy to free itself, and you cannot die in such a horrible fashion. You must understand and accept that sometimes, certain individuals are just beyond save. No, you're wrong. Ash interrupted defiantly, causing Arceus to stop mid-sentence and stare at him in surprise. The boy looked up at her with fire dancing in his eyes as he started yelling loudly, No one, no Pokémon, is ever beyond saving Arceus. I don't care who they are. He clenched his hands into fists. Haunter may have done bad, horrible things, but that does not mean it's beyond saving. I'm supposed to be this great, chosen one, aren't I? Well then how do you expect me to live up to those expectations if I can't save one Pokémon from itself? Arceus was silent as Ash continued ranting. Arceus, please. I can do this. I know I can. You have to believe in me. I know I can save Haunter if you just give me the chance. She simply shook her head at Ash and replied simply, what if you fail? What if you fail and the worst happens and you die? What becomes of the world then, young one? The trainer stood silent for a few moments while looking down at the grassy fields of the illusionary palette town until he finally looked back up at her and saying seriously, I'll just have to make sure I don't fail then. Please Arceus. I know I can do this. The great Pokémon stood in continued silence for several minutes, causing Ash to become nearly on the verge of his wits' end, before she finally spoke again. If you feel so strongly about this, Ash, I will not stop you. This is your life and you do have the option to choose what to do for yourself. I may not agree with it, but if you feel like you can help save Haunter from the depths of itself, I will support you, she conceded. Ash smiled widely at the massive Pokémon and bowed his head in respect. Thank you Arceus, I promise you won't regret this. Arceus shook her head and looked down on him with an exasperated expression showing within her eyes. I truly hope I do not, young one. Losing you would be a tragedy that I cannot fathom. She suddenly became serious again as she then said in an authoritative voice, now Ash, I need you to listen to me very closely. In order for you to have even a hope or prayer at succeeding at this, you are going to have to be at one with your star mark. Haunter's emotional aura will be the likes of which you have never dealt with before, and if you do not give it everything you have and then some, you will stand no chance in getting through to it. Do you understand? Ash nodded without any pause for thought. Yes Arceus, I understand. He then looked at his right palm which held the star mark within it. I swear that I will use this mark to the very best of my abilities in order to help Haunter. He vowed with resolution in his voice. Arceus gave her best version of a smile at him and nodded. If that is the case, then you will need the assistance of your friends, not just your Pokémon, young one. I believe now may be the time to confide in them. The boy seemed thoughtful for a few moments but eventually nodded himself. Yeah, I think you might be right. They've stuck by me this far and have proven how true of friends they are. I think now is the time, he agreed. She stood up to her full height and made a gesturing motion with her head. Then it is time you awaken, young one. We will see each other again soon, and until that time, keep your friends close, love and care for your Pokémon as equals instead of lessers, and never forget what is truly important in life. Which is love, respect, joy and honesty. Have fun with your life and on your journey, and never be afraid to take the path less traveled. As for your confrontation with Haunter, use the strength and purity of heart that I know is so abundant in you, and there is no doubt in my mind that you will succeed. Ash nodded and gave her another smile. I won't forget Arceus, and I will succeed in saving Haunter. His determined smile remained in place even as his body started to slowly fade from the mindscape, showing that he was about to wake up. Arceus smiled after him as he begun to fade, and just before he was totally gone and his mindscape started to vanish as well, she spoke softly into the wind, I have faith in you, young one. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX and found himself staring up at a ceiling while lying in a rather comfortable bed. He shifted a little and blinked his eyes to adjust to the dim light in the room as he sat up and looked around. He saw that he was in a rather spacious bedroom with hardwood walls, floors and ceilings. There was also a desk, wardrobe and other pieces of furniture spread throughout the room that looked to be made of some kind of expensive-looking wood. His eyes wandered down to the bed he was on and saw Pikachu lying at the foot of it, curled into a ball while sleeping away peacefully. He then shifted his focus to his left and saw, to his surprise, Giselle sitting on a chair by his bedside. She was fast asleep with her head leaning uncomfortably to the side and a frown in place on her face as she slept. Ash guessed that she must have been by his side nearly 24/7 since he went unconscious, knowing her, and had finally fallen asleep watching over him. Same with Pikachu evidently. This brought a smile to Ash's face as he looked at the two and felt a deep sense of affection and gratitude for them in that moment since they had apparently stayed with him the whole time he was out by the looks of it. Ash turned his head to the right and then saw something else that further shocked him. Sitting on a seat connected to a window at the far wall, on opposite sides with a blanket and pillow to each of them, were Brock and Misty. They had their heads leaning against the sides of the window that each of them were sitting at, with the blankets covering them up to their stomachs. Seeing this made Ash pause in thought as he took in the sight of his friends all in the room with him, sleeping in tiny little places and looking rather uncomfortable all things considered, just so they could be there for him. It really made him feel even more special in that moment and very grateful to his friends for the loyalty and dedication they were always showing him. He stirred a little bit more and it was enough to wake Pikachu, who opened his eyes groggily and saw his trainer sitting up in bed looking around. The little yellow mouse hopped up almost instantly and called out excitedly as he bounded over to Ash and jumped at him, "Pika Pie!" Ash, taken by surprise, caught Pikachu regardless and held him to his chest while hugging the happy Pokémon. All of the commotion was enough to wake his friends, who all jolted up with a start as they looked around worriedly. Upon seeing Ash awake though, all of them rushed over to the bed. "Ash, you're awake," Misty shouted as she ran to him. "Man, you had us worried," Brock breathed out with some relief in his voice as he stopped at the edge of the bed. "Giselle just threw yourself at him." "Oh Ash, you're okay," she said in a shaky voice as she hugged him tightly, squishing Pikachu in between them both. Ash let out a huff of air as Giselle squeezed him tightly and wrapped his arms around her in return as he wheezed out, "Why yeah Giselle, I'm good. I'm okay, can you ease up a little please? See, can't breath." Giselle released him quickly with an apologetic squeak and held him at arm's length while Pikachu jumped onto his shoulder and started to look over Ash in concern. While he talked to Pikachu in a reassuring tone to calm him down and let him know that he was okay, Giselle asked worriedly, "Are you okay Ash? We were so worried about you and had no clue what was happening. Fuji just said that you needed rest and then explained what happened to us, but we were really worried about you when he came back last night and you were unconscious on his shoulder." "Yeah Ash, what happened?" Misty asked as she came over and sat next to him and Giselle on the bed. Brock nodded as well, obviously wanting to know what had happened. Seeing this and knowing that the time had finally come for him to be honest with them, Ash decided to take Arceus's advice. Inhaling and then exhaling slowly, Ash collected his thoughts before finally speaking. "Okay guys, it's time to tell you all something that I've been keeping hidden for some time. I'll tell you what happened to me last night and I'll also reveal a secret I've been keeping but I need you all to understand that I wasn't trying to hurt you by not telling you this, and it wasn't because I don't trust you." His friends looked at each other before looking back at him again. "Ash, just tell us what you need to," Misty said comfortingly. Brock nodded. "Yeah, we won't be upset man, don't worry about it." Giselle held his hand. "Please Ash, we're your friends. Tell us what you need to." Looking at each of them in turn, he remained in silence for a few moments before finally speaking again. "Okay, well, this is what happened." He then went into a fully detailed explanation of everything that had happened to him the night before. Or at least, what he could remember of it. All throughout the story, Ash's friends remained engrossed in what he was saying. However, when Brock asked him how he knew the creature haunting Pokémon Tower was a haunter and why it was so interested in him, that's when he dropped the bombshell on them. As he started telling them about his meeting with Arceus, which made all of their eyes widen in shock, everything went totally dead silent. He explained everything to them concerning the revelations that the all Pokémon told him, and as he did so, Ash could tell that his friends were trapped between amazement, disbelief and complete and utter shock. By the time he finally finished up by telling them of his plans to find some way to help Haunter, all three of his companions were slack-jawed. For several minutes they just sat where they were and tried to process everything he just told them. Ash knew that if they even really believed him, what he had just revealed not only would have shocked them but essentially changed everything they ever thought they knew about life and how everything within it went on. Most people in the current era of the world didn't even believe Arceus existed, so to have someone tell you that not only did they meet them but also that they were some legendary prophesied one who was meant to all but change the world as you knew it, yeah, that would be a hard pill to swallow. Especially since Ash himself had a hard time believing everything that he had been both blessed and cursed by Arceus to know. Sometimes he did wonder why Arceus told him of his destiny, let alone when he was so young, but he knew he had no right to question it. She was essentially the creator of all things in the universe and he was just a kid. Someone who hadn't even lived a tiny, minuscule portion of the time she had. He knew that he could never hope to understand an omnipotent being's train of thought, so why even attempt to? Hell, Even if by some impossible chance his life was being made into a story or book of some kind that added new words and pages to it with each breath and step he took and was also being read by countless numbers of readers, Ash knew that not a single one of them would ever be able to even so much as hope to understand the inner machinations of a goddess like Arceus' mind. So with all that in mind, why would he even attempt to understand anything Arceus told him, let alone question it? He figured it best to just do as he was told for the sake of the world and also, honestly, for his own sanity as well. He trusted her and that was all there was to it. No one would ever change his mind on the matter and force him to think otherwise either. No one. Unfortunately, even though his mind processed these thoughts in such a way, he feared that his friends wouldn't be able to do the same and would end up losing their minds or having some kind of outburst at everything he just told them. Which was something he only did in the first place because once again, Arceus advised him to do so. When someone finally did speak again, it was Brock. Who did so slowly, almost as though he was still trying to comprehend what they had just been told even as he was speaking. So let me get this straight. He pointed at Ash. You are actually this chosen one that was created and brought into existence by Arceus, the god of all Pokémon and creator of everything, who is meant to bring peace to this world through an elaborate series of events and scenarios that even you do not know about completely, if at all. He rubbed his temples. Furthermore, this creature that has been terrorizing Pokémon Tower and is responsible for totally emptying an entire section of Lavender Town, is actually a haunter. A big, powerful, supercharged haunter that is actually almost 100 years old and is basically evil right now because of what a bunch of humans did to it long before. Do I have all of that right? Ash nodded and tilted his head from side to side slowly. Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Misty spoke up then. So wait a minute, since you are basically Arceus' favorite child, then, does she, you know? Misty trailed off and this caused him to prompt her on. Yeah, spit it out, Misty. She looked a little uncomfortable as she ventured onward slowly. Does she help you win your battles? Ash's eyes widened at that and he quickly shook his hands, not wanting any of them to get the wrong idea. No guys, not at all. No way, Arceus does not help me win my Pokémon battles. She helps me out in life-threatening situations and gives me a little advice here and there, but that's it. She never interferes with my life as a Pokémon trainer. All the battles I take on are just me and my Pokémon, no one else. I promise you all that. Seeing relief wash over all of their faces, he watched as Misty sighed. Okay, good to know. I was just wondering. When no one else said anything, Ash quickly grew confused. Is that it? None of you are gonna say anything else? Out of everything I just told you, all the life-changing bombs I just dropped on you, don't you have anything else to say? Anything? He raised his hands in the air. For Arceus' sake, you guys, I at least expected you to be terrified of me and run away as far as you could get. Best case. Worst case, I was afraid you would call the men in little white coats to come and get me. Brock, Misty and Giselle shared their own confused expressions with each other before Giselle looked back at him. Ash, why would we do that? He looked at her in disbelief. What? Why do you think? I'm basically a walking danger magnet that's only going to get you three into worse and worse trouble the longer you stay with me. You know why now too, so I don't get why you'd all be okay with this and not just walk out on me. Misty actually laughed at that. Oh come on, Ash. Do you really think that we would up and leave you all because you've turned out to be just as different and unnatural as we all already thought you were? Seeing his perplexed facial expression, Giselle elaborated. What Misty is trying to say, Ash, is that we are your friends and care about you no matter what. We have your back and always will. When we made the decision to come along with you, we were doing a whole lot more than just tagging along. We were making the choice to follow you and partake in whatever happened to you. Brock nodded. That's right, man. We're your pals and that's how we'll stay. If you've got some crazy ass destiny to fulfill, then we'll be here to help you out and do whatever we can to make sure you succeed. To say Ash was stunned would have most definitely been an understatement. He knew that his friends cared for him, but to go so far. Now he knew without a doubt that they were true friends through and through, with not so much as a shred of question in his mind anymore. Smiling, he shook his head. You guys just keep on surprising me. Honestly, I am totally touched by everything you all just said, and right now, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Without you three I don't know where I'd be. Misty and Giselle merely smiled and hugged him while Brock grinned and waved his hand. Just explain to us this whole plan you've got for helping Hunter and then we'll take it on from there, dude, in whatever way we have to. Ash nodded and then collected his thoughts before speaking again once Misty and Giselle had released him. Well, honestly, I don't know exactly how I'm gonna go about doing it, but before I do anything, Arceus told me that I needed to speak to Mr. Fuji. I don't know why exactly, but she hinted that he had something to do with Hunter's imprisoning. I need to find out what. Misty gestured towards the door. Well, they're downstairs drinking tea, so it might be a good time to talk to him. They both wanted to know how you were when you woke up too. Ash nodded and then got up out of the bed. Slipping his tracksuit jacket on, he waited until Pikachu was up on his shoulder before walking towards the door. Come on then guys, let's go and talk to them. His friends quickly exited their seats and followed Ash downstairs. Upon entering the living room kitchen area of the small apartment-like house, they spotted Fuji and Agatha sitting around the coffee table in the middle of the room while sipping tea. Glancing up, Fuji spotted Ash and waved at him. "Ah, Ash, you're finally awake, I see. Feeling any better now?" The boy walked over to one of the couches around the coffee table and took a seat with Giselle and Misty sitting beside of him. Brock took his own next to Agatha on the couch she was sitting on while Fuji remained in his armchair. "Yeah, I am actually a lot better. I really need to thank you, Mr. Fuji. If not for you, then I don't know what would have happened." Well, actually that wasn't true. He knew that Arceus would have found some way to save him, but there was no sense in splitting hairs now. Fuji did a very selfless thing by saving him, and in Ash's mind, he deserved the proper gratitude that was owed to him for that. The old merely waved it off. "Don't thank me, Ash. You were in danger, and as my guest, let alone a young trainer whom I have grown to respect and like, I could have never left you to the horrid fate I'm sure would have befallen you if you had remained there." Agatha joined into the conversation. "I myself was very worried about you when Fuji brought you back in the condition you were in, but he assured us all that you were okay. I must say that you are either very lucky or have a guardian angel on your shoulder, young man, because if what Fuji told us is true, then you were in great danger. Either way, I am pleased you are safe," the old woman finished with a warm smile in his direction. Ash smiled in return at them and bowed his head. "Thank you both for being so concerned about me and also for being so kind. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it." Fuji pointed at the tea kettle on the coffee table then. "Please, young people, help yourself to some tea if you wish. Meanwhile, if it is not too soon, I would be interested to know exactly what happened to you, Ash. That is, if you can even remember." Fuji of course knew most of what had happened to Ash since he witnessed the bulk of it for himself, but he wanted to see how much the young man could remember before he actually said anything, lest he bring up any memories of the former night that Ash would rather leave in the past and out of mind. Naturally, he knew nothing about Arceus' intervention as the cause for the light that had saved them both, but in the same respect, Ash had no clue what it was either as far as Fuji was aware. If the boy could even remember anything from the previous night, of course. Agatha interjected at that moment, "Even if you can remember what happened but the memory is still too raw, then don't feel like you need to tell it, Ash. We can wait, or you don't have to tell us at all." Fuji nodded in agreement to what she said. Ash shook his head. "No, I was going to talk to you about it anyway. To be honest, I need to know something that I believe only you can answer for me, Mr. Fuji. In fact, before I even begin to go into the biggest part of what I have to tell you, I'm going to have to ask for complete honesty from you. Can you give me that?" Fuji looked at Ash oddly but nodded regardless. "Of course, Ash. I will tell you whatever I can to help answer any question you have." Ash took a deep breath and then let it out. "Okay, this is what happened to me." And so, he went into a long tale of everything that he could remember concerning the previous night's events. With each new detail added, every part explained, and minute after minute that passed, Fuji and Agatha's faces morphed from ones of shock, to disbelief, and then finally, to utter blankness. When he finally finished, there was silence in the room. It remained this way for many minutes more until Fuji finally spoke in a shaky, unsteady voice. Is all of that true, Ash? You aren't embellishing any of it?" When the boy shook his head with a serious expression upon his face, Fuji went slack in his chair. "A haunter, it was always a haunter. I never would have guessed." Agatha herself seemed to be in a state of similar bafflement. Never, in all my years of ghost Pokémon studying and research have I ever heard of a haunter being able to do the things that. She then looked at Fuji with a haunted shadow in her eyes. What we did, Fuji, all of the assumptions about what it was, we were. The old man cut her off. Wrong. Yes, my dear Agatha, I know, we were horrible wrong. We never could have known. By this point, everyone else in the room, even Ash, was rather perplexed and didn't have any clue as to what they were talking about. Ash had a feeling that what they were speaking of was part of what Arceus told him he needed to find out from Fuji, but he also got the feeling that whatever it was big. Being the first to speak, Ash spoke up as he needed to have answers. Mr. Fuji, Agatha, what is it? Please tell me what you're talking about. I need to know what it is that you know, or the next thing that I am going to tell you, about the thing that I have to do, it won't be able to happen otherwise. Please. Fuji looked back at him and sighed after several moments of silence. Oh, very well, after what you went through, you deserve to know whatever I can tell you, Ash. Now, bear in mind, what I did, what Agatha and I both did it was all we could think of to save this town and stop the catastrophe that was happening at the time. Ash nodded. Yes, that's fine, I understand. I'm not going to judge you for anything you did, I just want to have some answers to all of this crazy crap that's been happening. Fuji looked down at his teacup before replying. Agatha and I were the ones that locked Hunter away into the room that it's in now below Pokémon Tower. Many years ago, when Hunter first appeared in the tower, the town had already been through a devastating event, and Hunter's coming, combined with the torment it brought to the town, was slowly but surely causing everything to crumble around it. So, to end it, we took actions into our own hands. He paused for a moment and looked at Agatha. To be honest, I have thought it many times that the level of horror and destruction Hunter brought with it was entirely my fault, and Agatha smacked his shoulder. Oh, shut up, you old fool. I have told you over and over that your past had nothing to do with what befell this town. Now stop it. Fuji held his hands up and tried to placate her. I am sorry, Agatha, I know shouldn't say such things, but I just can't help myself sometimes. Looking at Ash again, he sighed once more. My past youth has many events of unfortunate circumstances, riddling several of the decisions I made. Ash leaned forward and clasped his hands together curiously, with his friends mimicking his curiosity in different ways. Seeing this, Fuji started explaining. You see, kids, I didn't always live here, and my life hasn't always been what you see now. A kind, at least I hope I'm kind, old man who runs a small gym out of his home and just cares for his community. No, I used to be much more, or less depending on how you look at it, than I am now. The truth is, I was born and raised on Cinnabar Island to a quite wealthy family. The Fuji family has a long line of scientists, biologists, archaeologists, Pokémon researchers, you name it, in our bloodline. Many of my family over the years has held much renown in scientific areas of research all over different parts of the world. My parents were no different. My father was an oceanic researcher who studied the makeup of the islands and geography of the ocean in the southern seas where Cinnabar and several other island chains were located, while my mother on the other hand studied marine Pokémon life specifically and exclusively. Both of them being quite successful in their respective fields as well. I had two brothers besides myself. An older brother by the name of Blaine and a younger one named Isaac. We lived in the family Fuji manor our entire growing up on the island and went to an exclusive prep school that was famous on Cinnabar called Seaside Academy. It was actually one of the most popular private schools in all of Kanto, and we were three of the brightest minds in the school at the time. And that's not bragging either, our marks more than showed it. We were also favored and preferred amongst the teachers and other faculty of the academy due, not only to our grades, but also in large part to the name of our family and the success of our parents as scientists. My brother Isaac and I both had dreams of being just like our parents and had a penchant for the arts of science. All three of us were quite successful at school and had top grades, but our eldest brother, Blaine, broke the mold somewhat by being more interested in Pokémon training and battling than anything else. In fact, he followed his dream and passion and ended up becoming Cinnabar's very first gym leader years later. Fuji shook his head. But I digress. Isaac and myself were always fascinated with Pokémon as well, but for us it was more from a scientific, biological standpoint. Prehistoric Pokémon that were long since extinct held our fascination more than any other, and that led to us fashioning our own long-term dream. Once we graduated the academy, Isaac and I went to different universities within Kanto to specialize in our own preferred fields. For him it was Pokémon physiology and psychology, and for myself, I studied in Pokémon cellular genetics and evolution. Our dream was to create the world's very first Pokémon resurrection machine, and in order to do that, we needed to have a working fundamental knowledge of every physical aspect of Pokémon that we could. Hence why Isaac studied physiology and psychology and I studied cellular genetics and evolution. Giselle went wide-eyed. Pokémon resurrection machine. What is that? The old man smiled. Simple. We wanted to create a machine that would be able to read a fossilized Pokémon's genetic code and then essentially restore its physical form from the base up. In theory, you would be turning an ancient, long-extinct Pokémon from a fossilized rock back into a living, breathing creature. Basically turning back the clock, so to speak. All three kids' eyes went wide in disbelief, and it made Fuji chuckle. Yes, I know, as incredible and far-fetched as it sounds, but we were determined to make our dream a reality. Once we finished with school, Isaac and I returned to Cinnabar in order to collect our inheritance and pay our respects to our parents, who had passed on in a research vessel accident off the coast of Cinnabar while we were away. Our brother Blaine used his half of the inheritance to build his gym, and we used ours to come together and construct the island's very first scientific research facility, which we called Seafoam Labs, after the island chain far south of Cinnabar that our parents met at for the first time years before when they were on separate research expeditions. Once we were up and running, Isaac and I hired a few assistants and then went to work on making our dream a reality. Being a public research facility, we needed to bring in income, so we took on various other projects that we would work on at different times in between working on our big project, that way we could get funding. Over the years we took on small projects that never saw the light of day and others which turned out to be quite the success. Why, we had a hand in many of the big-name gadgets, devices and appliances you can find today. One of the biggest things we had ever worked on, which was actually the smallest part we ever played in a project, was when we helped several regional professors and other Pokémon researchers create the Pokédex. Ash sat straight up in his chair. Really? You helped create the Pokédex? Even though Fuji was getting a little off topic, Ash always loved learning and hearing new stories from those who were older and had more experience than him in life. Moments like this were a priceless gem to him. The old man waved his hand and laughed a little nervously. Oh no, not a huge part, mind you, but yes, we did help a bit. We didn't have anything to do with the content or collected knowledge that went into the Pokédex, but we did help design it and provide a good place in which the real brains behind the project could work on and test it out. Fuji leaned back then and stared up at the ceiling with a wistful smile on his face. I remember working with some of the brightest and greatest minds of the time, even up to the present day, back then. From Professor Oak himself, Professor Rowan of the Sinnoh region, Professor Westwood who lives not too far away from Cinnabar Island, and even Professor Juniper from Unova. Of course, we also had several other bright young minds working on the project who have risen to quite the notable prominence in their respective fields of research in recent years. Such as Professor Elm from the Johto region, Professor Birch from Hoenn, and one of the most important of all, Bill himself, who helped to collect the largest amount of data and information for the Pokédex. There were a few others as well, but I can't remember them all now. Fuji smiled fondly. I remember Professor Juniper would bring his then young daughter, Rhea, with him to the lab on more than one occasion when we'd be working. That girl was a chip off the old block, just like her father. Loved anything to do with Pokémon and especially Pokémon research. Hyper girl she was, brilliant as they came, but hyper though. That little lady would get into so much trouble and keep us all on our toes every minute of every day. Prankster too, lemme tell ya. He laughed aloud. There was this one time where she went on a mad pranking spree and put glue on Isaac's chair, hot sauce in my coffee, peanut butter in Oak's ears, and stole her father's hairpiece and strung it up on the flagpole outside the building. Fuji descended into a fit of laughter again as Ash sat there with a gaping mouth. He had only seen Rhea Juniper once, and that was on a video call she had been having with Professor Oak back when he was training with him. He recalled how intelligent, classy, knowledgeable and kind, not to mention beautiful, she had seemed to be during that call, so to hear Fuji describing her as pretty much a monster child when she was younger made his mind more than a little confused. Seeing Ash's perplexed face, Fuji stopped laughing and spoke again. "Oh no Ash, you miss the point. That was merely how she was as a child. Araya actually grew into quite a fine young woman and even followed in her father's footsteps and became the Unova region's leading Pokémon professor." Ash nodded. "Yeah, I know, I saw her one time on video call while I was training with Professor Oak. He also speaks quite highly of her." Fuji went to say something else before being elbowed by Agatha, who raised an eyebrow at him. "You're getting off subject again, ya old coot." He raised his hands and shook his head. "Ah yes. Ga, I apologize, sometimes I just ramble too much. Anyway, over the course of the next few years, my brother and I continued to work on different projects here and there while continuously using every bit of money we had to make our ultimate goal into a reality. About 6 years into our research facility's opening, we finally came closer than we ever had to achieving our dream. We actually had a plan on how to go about building the Pokémon resurrection machine and even had several different schematics drawn up to put it into action." Fuji then sighed sadly. "Unfortunately, we ended up hitting a roadblock that we both feared we would end up encountering. While our plans were sound and our blueprints were feasible, we were simply working on a machine that was just too advanced for the technology that was available to us at the time. Seeing this, we had no choice but to stop work on it. Then, shortly after that, we were presented with an offer that at the time, seemed like a gift from Arceus but was really more of a horrible nightmare thought up by Darkrai itself than anything else." The old man shook his head lowly. "About 6 months after stopping work on our project and becoming rather discouraged that our dream had been stopped so abruptly, especially Isaac, we were approached by representatives from a newly founded company called the Rocket Corporation." Ash's eyes widened. "That sounds like..." Fuji nodded. "Yes, Team Rocket. Or at least, how they originally started out. You see kids, back in my early days, Team Rocket weren't what they are in present time. Now they are known, or what little is actually known of them at least, for being cruel, vile, ruthless criminals that spit in the face of the law and will do anything they have to in order to make money. However, back then they were much different. I suppose you could say they pulled off a perfect, mighty Enna in Marique's clothing, at the beginning. When they first appeared on the scene in Kanto, they masqueraded as a new business corporation that was trying to find new ways to create clean, renewable energy for the world as well as advertising themselves as investors that believed in giving back to the world of science for the betterment of all life. We were told by the employees who came to us that they were going around the region trying to recruit up-and-coming, highly sought-after scientists into their company's newly budding science and research division. We were told that they were working on projects which would truly make a positive difference for the world and that they needed every bright mind they could possibly get. The silver-tongued devils knew exactly how to speak our language too because they then said that their technology was state-of-the-art and never before seen in Kanto. Quite naturally, this piqued mine and my brother's curiosity. We figured that if we could work for them for a time and get to know and understand the machines and technology they had on hand, we could potentially put what inheritance money we had left into creating our own versions of them in order to finally make our PRM machine. Or at the very least, possibly make a deal to buy some equipment off the company after we worked there for a time. This in mind, we accepted the job. Well, that and they also paid a near unbelievable salary. Something which caught my brother's interest right away. We had been living rather frugally over the years since we put every dime we could into our machine and Isaac made it known quite often how much he detested living in such a way. I think he accepted the job more for the money than the possibility of finally achieving our dream, but I never said anything. At the time, I was too excited myself. Fuji paused and took a drink from his teacup. We were shipped off to the Rocket Corporation HQ, which was somewhere I still don't know the location of. To get you there they would put you in a helicopter with blacked out windows and then fly you directly into the building's aircraft hangar. A fact I probably should have seen as suspicious back then, but I didn't. Isaac and I were soon placed on our own team in the Research Center for Advanced Technobiology along with 2 other young scientists. One known as Dr. Zager and the other a man named Dr. Namba. At first the 4 of us got along great and shared many similar interests. We all had high hopes, big dreams and somewhat skewed beliefs on how the world really was. It didn't take long at all after our team was formed that we started getting handed down a whole host of different project assignments. Nothing too out of the ordinary at first. A few energy-saving projects, new ways in which to feed the hungry, environmental conservation, you name it. Honestly, we all worked very well together. We each had our own list of strengths and weaknesses, and one didn't have, the other did, and vice versa. We complemented each other, which was why they put us together as a team, I guess, and for the first year things were great. We were making good money, which we hadn't actually seen yet since they kept it all in employee accounts. We lived on site, so they paid completely for everything we needed, which is a reason why we never really had that much concern for why we didn't see any of the supposed big money we were making. Isaac and I were also truly working around state-of-the-art equipment, which I myself came to realize would, with a little tweaking here and here, work perfectly for our project back home. In fact, I had even started drawing up blueprints of the machines that would most likely benefit our PRM machine so that I could get to work building them back home if the company refused to give us access to the equipment there at HQ. The best part, for me at least, was that I truly thought the projects we were working would really be making a difference in the world. When we finished one, the supervisors of our department would have the completed projects taken away for, what they said was, field testing, and if it passed, they would move on to getting it manufactured and distributed. It wasn't until everything started changing a year later and the company began showing its true colors did I learn what they were really doing with their hard work. Fuji clenched his fists together. What they were really doing was scrapping everything we and every other team would work on. Junk it. Dismantle and tear it all apart in some other part of the building where no employee was allowed to go. In reality, they had been having us do all of these assignments as a test run. They wanted to weed out the best of us and get rid of any that didn't make the cut. What better way than to give large projects which took whole teams to complete and then judge each individual team after they were done? That's exactly what they did, and we were all stupid enough to follow it. Like Raticate on a wheel. The older man shook his head and clicked his tongue. Eventually I began noticing changes in the company that started off subtle and then became more and more noticeable and extreme as time passed. The company started cracking down on us all, contact to the outside world became less and less frequent, patience and understanding became a thing of the past, and the projects began taking on very questionable undertones. A fact which I started noticing pretty early on and would make my opinions known about. It eventually became so bad with certain assignments we were given, things like Pokémon, genetic experimentation, weather-modifying machines, psychological manipulation, that I just couldn't bring myself to do them anymore and would speak out against them. Subtly, of course, so I wouldn't seem like a renegade, but I still spoke out. Eventually I was taken completely off my team and instead I was placed on some geological mining project that was bound for the Kalos region in order to study and take samples of strange new stones geologists were finding over there called Mega Evolution stones. I was given orders to leave and got shipped out before I even had a chance to say goodbye to my brother. Something I know was intentional because, unlike me, my brother had no problems working on the projects given to them. He reveled in it, found pleasure in working on what the admins of the company said would change the world, but no longer with, for the better, part in it. Zager and Namba had changed as well in that time, both of them falling deeper and deeper into the mad science of what they were being forced to undertake. No longer did they care for the betterment of the world, it became nothing more for them than a way to make a lot of money and feel like rock stars while doing it. Fuji huffed. Oh yes, the company loved them. They didn't care what heinous crimes against nature or unnatural acts they had to perform in order to create the things they were working on. They loved every minute of it, and as much as I hated to see it, Isaac was falling into the same dark web of villainy. No longer did he even care for our dream, it was all about money and the vanity of it. Going silent, Fuji shook his head for what seemed like the 10th time before going on. I spent a little over a year in the Kalos region. Myself and the expedition team I was with, which were really nothing more than a group of rocket lackeys who had once been promising geologists in their own fields but fell to the darker side of their profession after joining the corporation, spent our entire time there searching for Mega Evolution stones. I knew from the time we first arrived that what we were doing was illegal because we secluded ourselves away from anyone else, only searched supposed hot spots in the dead of night, and weapons amongst our superiorso became a normal sight to see while on the search for the stones. I honestly grew to become rather detached from it all. No longer did I have any delusions that the company I was working for wasn't just a band of criminals hellbent on their own selfish deeds. Unfortunately, I knew there was nothing I could do to stop them, so I just kept my head down and tried to stay out of trouble. Once we finally returned home, empty-handed with no luck of finding any mega stones, I was almost immediately placed back on my old team. Something which surprised me since I was all but certain my days in the Rocket Research Center were over. Apparently though, they needed some of their best teams on board for a massive project they were undertaking of the utmost secrecy. Fuji let out a long, drawn-out sigh. So, being back on the same team with Zager, Namba and Isaac again, all three having changed dramatically since the last time I saw them to the point of where I no longer recognized even my own brother, we began work on what came to be known as Project Genesis. Ash leaned forward until he was almost sitting off of his chair. Project Genesis. What was it? Fuji sat back in his chair a little more and traced his finger around the rim of his teacup. Project Genesis was the very first true genetic experimentation project of the high-caliber level it was at that the organization had ever taken on. In simple terms, they wanted to artificially create a Pokémon of their very own. Giselle and Misty both spoke up then at the same time, create their own Pokémon. He nodded. Yes, and not just any Pokémon either. To genetically engineer a Pokémon you first need the genes, meaning DNA code, of another Pokémon that already exists to use as the base model, so to speak, for creating a completely new one. The Pokémon whose DNA we ended up using as a cloning model was Mew. No way. Brock muttered in disbelief. Impossible. Giselle exclaimed loudly. I didn't even think Mew existed. Misty said in an equal tone of shock. Ash, however, remained silent as he listened to Fuji continue what he was telling them. Yes, Mew. To this day I don't know how they managed to collect a sample of such a mythical Pokémon, but however they did it, we had a hair sample to use as our source for extracting the DNA from. Over the coming months, we worked tirelessly on the project of reversing engineering the hair fiber found, replicating it and then mutating it during gestation to create a new Pokémon. Unlike the two other insane scientists and my equally as mad brother whom I worked with, I took absolutely no joy or had any interest in what we were doing. From what I had been seeing out of the company, I knew that whatever our abomination of a creation we were working on turned out to be, if it even succeeded, would almost definitely be used for some evil purpose, and it was that very thought process that eventually led to me betraying the organization. Ash looked surprised. You turned on Team Rocket? He nodded again. Indeed. One day a conference meeting was called that had every Rocket Corporation member at the time in attendance. The Genesis project was nearing a great breakthrough, and with the way the admins had been breathing down our necks and forcing us to work faster, I knew that the meeting could only mean nothing good. I feared something terrible was about to change, and it turned out I was right. They announced to us all at large that the company was officially entering a new evolution of its existence, and that the time had come for the Rocket's true purpose and potential to flourish. The lead admin in charge of the entire company, who was right below the mysterious boss that no one ever saw, was a man named Riken. Ash and Pikachu both formed angered expressions at the mention of the name, and Fuji raised an eyebrow. I take it you know of him. The boy gave a terse nod. Yeah, we know of the bastard. Seeing that Ash wasn't offering up any more info and not willing to push him, Fuji went on. Riken announced that the company was officially changing over to become an organization of questionable legality, and that the name would officially be changed to Team Rocket. At the same time, several employees who had already taken proudly to the new organization name came into the announcement hall wearing the same outfits you see on Rocket agents presently. Basically, we were given a choice at that time. We could either take up the uniforms and follow the organization to whatever end, or be terminated. I was no fool and realized what this meant right away. Luckily, I was nearest to the door and managed to slip out just as I heard several of the bravest people I ever knew of start protesting against the drastic change in direction the company had decided on. Fuji looked down then and closed his eyes. I stopped just outside of the door and watched as chaos erupted. Almost immediately, Riken gave a single hand gesture and the dozens of newly minted, Team Rocket grunts started releasing vicious, feral, completely brainwashed Pokémon that only had one desire, which was to serve Team Rocket. They then shut the main doors in order to prevent escape and he shuddered slightly as bad memories replayed themselves in his head. Everyone that didn't join them were slaughtered. Right then and there. It was carnage. I still remember the sight, the sounds, the smell of blood as it splashed through the air and coated the walls and floor in its red stain of death. Raticate resorted to swarming people and biting them to pieces, ripping out flesh from the neck and main arteries on the legs. Zubat and Golbat were draining the very life from their victims. Fighting types were using some of them like human training bags, crushing their limbs and ripping them apart. Some of the Pokémon were given orders to simply maul the poor souls until they were dead. He took a deep, calming breath to steady himself then while everyone in the room, even Agatha, seemed to be very unsettled from the horrendous tale of murder and carnage caused by such an evil, completely immoral organization that had haunted more thoughts and wrought more pain than anyone could imagine. Ash however had his hands on his knees with his fists clenched tightly and teeth gritted. His anger, his utter hatred for Team Rocket growing with each passing moment. Giselle saw this and began to fear for his self-control as she reached out and gently took hold of his hand to steady and comfort him. Which worked almost instantly as he looked at her and, upon seeing her comforting smile, felt peace wash over him. Oblivious to the plight of the others, Fuji continued, seemingly wrapped up in his own storytelling. After that I left, unable to stand the brutality I was witnessing. I knew without even looking that my brother had joined the new cause of Team Rocket and I took that as the severing of our final ties. I decided right then and there that Project Genesis could never be allowed to see its completion and that's when I went to the lab and destroyed all of our research while everyone was preoccupied with what was happening in the meeting hall. There were very volatile chemicals in the lab that were extremely flammable so I simply opened the vats, broke open some nearby gas canisters and then collected my own personal research notes before leaving. I knew that without my valuable research notes and data files which I had created and compiled over the course of the year working on Project Genesis, that they would have a much harder time completing it and that's why I took my research. Not wanting there to be any chance of it surviving for Team Rocket to find after the explosion that followed my actions. And yes, I did say explosion. After I sabotaged the lab I only had a short time to get out and not even 5 minutes after I managed to and was well away from the headquarters, did the entire section of the building that the lab was in exploded. I knew I had to make myself scarce as fast as I could but being that I was never able to see where the HQ building was actually located, I was forced to flee into the nearby forest and ran until I eventually came out to a town sometime later that I recognized. Which was Viridian City. Soon after that I decided to go underground since I knew Team Rocket would be looking for me. With that in mind I headed back home to Cinnabar Island, reconnected with my brother Blaine and went back to researching on the original dream I had since I was a child. Which was building myself an Isaac's resurrection machine. It wasn't easy adjusting at first and I knew Blaine had questions but he respected my privacy and never asked too much.